At 11 o'clock on a cold October night in 2026, a 74-year-old machinist named Chester Boyd knelt on the basement floor of a farmhouse nobody had wanted for 37 years and set a rotary hammer against the one patch of concrete that did not sound like the rest. 7 months before, he had owned a paid-off house on Juniper Street and a daughter he trusted. He still had neither, and only one of those losses was an accident. Corinne had been losing for 3 years at a card table across the state line, a casino already dragging her through court, when she used a power of attorney he had signed out of love and sold the house he shared with his late wife out from under him to feed the table. She told him it was for his safety. He believed her, the way a father believes his daughter right up to the day he can no longer afford to. He left with 2 suitcases, a toolbox, and $8,700 she never knew about. What lay hidden under that slab had been waiting in the dark since before she was born, and it would give him back everything she took. Just not in the way anyone expects. Stay with him. What cracks open on that basement floor tonight is the first thing in a year that anybody has trusted Chester Boyd to handle. Chester Boyd had been a widower for 2 years when the papers came. He had nursed Rosalie through the last 18 months of her illness, and after she was gone, he kept the house on Juniper Street exactly as she left it. Her sewing machine under its cover, her thimble on the sill above it, a small brass dent of a thing he dusted around and never moved. What he could not see, 300 miles south, was where his daughter's evenings had gone. Corinne had been losing for 3 years. First on the bright screen in her hand, then across the state line in a room with no clocks and no windows, where a proud woman could tell herself the next hand was a plan and not a fall. By the November she drove up to see him, a casino had already taken her to court. She said nothing about that. She brought a folder. The folder held a kindness he wanted badly to believe in, a financial power of attorney, a healthcare directive. Just in case, Dad. Tabs marked where a father signs. He mentioned while he signed that he still remembered the crayon drawings she used to leave on the bed of his lathe, machines with smiling faces. Corinne watched the pen instead of his face. 2 nights later, the same hand that had steadied his over the signature tabs lost $11,000 she did not have, at a table that did not care whose father had raised her. Through the winter came more papers, 1 or 2 at a time, all of it housekeeping, insurance, something for the county. Each envelope she carried north was matched, though he never saw it, by a worse one waiting south. A balance, a notice, a number with a date on it. And one form slid across the kitchen table that a lawyer would later read back to him as an authorization to sell the house. The power of attorney had never given her the right to sell it out from under him. She never needed it to. She needed only his habit of signing wherever his daughter pointed. In the first week of March, she came with a realtor's card clipped to a new folder. There was a buyer, and a hurry she never explained. A closing inside the month, papers that could not wait. Her phone kept buzzing while she talked. She turned it face down on the kitchen table, and he never learned that the buzzing was the table itself, calling in what she owed. You don't turn away an offer like this. Not in this market. Not at your age. An apartment waited above a pharmacy in the city, close to her, where somebody could look in on him. He stood at his own counter and asked the only question that mattered. Is this for my safety or for what the house brings? Corinne squared the papers against the table, once, twice, and did not answer. The house was never being sold to keep her father safe. It was being sold to feed a table that would not stop until there was nothing of his left to put on it. And she was not cruel about it. That was the part that would take him longest to understand. A person could love you and still set you on the scale, still weigh what you were worth against what she owed, and let the debt win. Nobody forced him out. That was the finish of it, the part that sat under his sternum like a burr. Every signature was his own, his hand. He left with 2 suitcases and a toolbox. The sewing machine stayed under its cover. The thimble he believed was in the second suitcase. He was wrong, and would not learn it for a long time. What Corinne never knew about, the one thing she had never put a number on, was a credit union account holding $8,700, built a paycheck at a time over 40 years. November to March. One winter was all it took for the paper meant to guard him to become the paper that put him on the road. He spent 2 nights in a motel. On the 3rd morning, at a library computer, his laptop lost in the dismantling of his life, he found a tax sale listing from a county in northern Vermont. 13 wooded acres and a farmhouse in Colby Hollow, Perrin County. Minimum bid, $4,500. Beneath the photographs, one line of small print. Unsold at 3 previous offerings. A place nobody wanted. And it was that line, more than the price, that put him in the truck heading north. The truck was a 1998 GMC Sierra, with brake pads he kept meaning to get to. At the county office, the clerk warned him. The old Teal place, empty 37 years, roof bad since the Reagan administration. He asked one thing, had anybody died in there? Nobody knew, she admitted. He paid $4,850 by cashier's check in late May and drove out to Tamarack Ridge Road with $3,850 left in the world. The porch had gone down like a knee. Saplings stood in the parlor, grown through the floorboards toward a hole in the roof. Chester walked it slowly, tapping walls, pressing joists, and read the house the way he had read blueprints for 40 years. Not for what was gone, but for what it could still bear. The frame was true. This house had not died. It had only been left. That first night he sat on the hearthstone of a cold fireplace, and it caught up with him all at once. Juniper Street, the folders, her sewing machine in a house that belonged to strangers now. He cried the way men of his generation cry, silently, jaw set, where no witness would ever stand. For his wife. And a little, just a little, for himself. Then he stood, ran a sleeve across his face, and went out to clear the porch steps while there was light. The hardware store belonged to Merle Haskins, who watched the unfamiliar truck park without appearing to look at it. Chester asked where the tarps were. Merle pulled down the heavy-gauge roll a roof actually needs, and when the total climbed past what a stranger could hide, he opened a spiral notebook and wrote the figure under B. Square it when that roof holds water. If it never does, I priced it wrong to begin with. As Chester reached the door, "You eat anything today?" It was not pity, it was arithmetic. Down the street, Lottie Dunn ran a diner with 4 booths. The 3rd refill of coffee came without asking, and one evening a slice of pie arrived that he had not ordered and never saw on a check. She never asked for his story. Kindness in Colby Hollow did not announce itself. It was measured out plain and level, like feed. For 2 weeks he worked the roof and slept in the bed of the Sierra, woken some nights by a possum in the kitchen wall, a tenant, he figured, with a longer claim to the place than his own. A grief worked in him those weeks that he had no practice at. When Rosalie died, there had been a full church, hymns, a stone with her name, and 2 dates cut clean. The world knows what to do with a man who loses his wife. It has no instructions for a man who loses a daughter who is still alive. No pews, no stone. Nobody carves the date you stopped being somebody's father. He had buried his wife with the whole town for witness. Corinne he buried a shovelful at a time, alone, with a hammer in his hand.
Winter comes early to Colby Hollow, and before it gets there, tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening from. This story travels farther than Chester's old Sierra ever could. And stay with him. Because under that farmhouse, a patch of concrete had kept a secret for 37 years, and the man sleeping above it was exactly the wrong man to keep a secret from.
October came down off the ridge smelling of wet stone and cold iron, and Chester went to work on the basement. A house 37 winters unminded was owed one honest look before the frost went deep. The cellar was low-ceilinged and dark, tamped earth underfoot, and along the walls collapsed shelving that had let go decades ago, its jars gone to dust. He hauled and sorted for a week. On the 11th day of that work, he dragged the last fallen section away from the north wall and stopped. Set into the earthen floor was a patch of concrete, roughly 3 feet by 4, tight against the wall. Grayer than the crumbling apron under the stairs, and smoother. Different mix, different decade. Poured later, by somebody who cared how it cured. 40 years around machinery teaches a man to listen with his knuckles. He rapped the apron, and the sound came back short and dead, the way solid material answers. Then he rapped the gray patch. The knock came back rounder, with a breath of space under it, the way an empty tank answers different from a full one. An old cistern, he told himself. That night he lay in the dark thinking about the patch instead of about Corinne, and there was something in the trade that felt nearly like rest. In the morning he put a rotary hammer on store credit for the second time. Merle rang it up without one question and pushed the box across the counter with a flat look. "Whatever you're opening up," he said, "leave yourself a way to close it." He did not open anything that day. He measured first. He set his square against the wall, tapped the patch inch by inch, and chalked the line where the sound changed. A machinist does not smash blind into anything. Material will tell you where it is hollow, the same way steel tells you where it is flawed. When the chalk rectangle was finished, he stood over it a long moment. For 40 years he had cut into things to learn what was wrong with them. He had never once cut into anything to learn what it was keeping. The slab fought him the way old work fights, and somewhere past the middle of that cold night, the last web of concrete let go under the chisel point. Beneath it, there was no earth. There was wood. A timber frame, square cut and joined like furniture, dark with age but sound, and seated in the frame a cap of slate with a rope pull rotted down to a gray whisker. He brushed the edges clean, knelt a moment with his hands on his thighs, then worked his fingers under the stone and lifted. The slate came up, and the dark under that house had a shape. A box, timber framed and dry, built to survive the man who made it. His flashlight found steel first, military ammunition boxes. Inside the first, bundles wrapped in waxed paper, old bills, 20s and 50s and a few hundreds, the ink still sharp. Beside them, 2 small wooden boxes, heavy beyond cents, silver dollars ranked on edge like washers in a drawer. Under those, a flat packet of bearer bonds, every one issued before 1983, made out to bearer, to no name at all. The satchel he almost missed, leather gone black and soft with rot. Inside were envelopes tied with twine, and on each envelope, in the same upright hand, a family name and a date. Cutler, March of 1974. Bissonette, September of 1976. Ferris, January of 1979. Inside them, promissory notes and mortgage papers. Last was a ledger, the dime store kind, its entries running from 1964 to 1988. A date, a name, an amount to a line. Folded inside the back cover lay a deed to 35 acres adjoining this land, signed and notarized in 1972, and a note in the same hand. The deed had never gone to record, and the rest waited at the town clerk's office. He spent nothing. He fetched the disposable camera bought for the roof and photographed everything where it lay, then fitted plywood over the opening and weighted it. It was the satchel, not the silver, that unsteadied him. The heaviest thing in that vault was not the coin, it was the names, because a man buries money to keep it from being found. Nobody buries names, not unless he is guarding the people who carry them, and means for the guarding to outlast him.
He took a careful version of it to the diner. Lottie topped off his coffee before he finished asking.
Old paper in this county means Imogene Sharp. Carriage house behind the church. Knock loud. The archive was one room, shelves to the ceiling. Imogene Sharp heard out the careful version. Old concrete, papers with local names, a ledger, and left the rest. She listened like a woman who had spent 37 years waiting for somebody to ask. She folded her cotton gloves in her lap. Then it's true. I half believed we'd invented him. Through the farm crisis years, interest rose like floodwater, and half the small farms in Perrin County stood one bad season from the auction block. The banks sold doubtful mortgage notes at a discount. Ambrose Teal bought them quietly, and then nothing happened. No foreclosure, no collector. Some families paid $1 a year to a post office box, a token that kept the note alive on paper, so a proud man could stay current on a debt and never say out loud that anyone had carried him. Others got a letter instead. Paid in full. No name. Mine was one of the letters, Imogene said. 1976. My father was a week from selling the herd. I learned who years too late to thank him. Teal lived like a man with nothing. One coat, one old truck. In 1989, he stopped coming to town. No death certificate. No will. He did not die on paper. He simply stopped. Chester asked what her record showed for the 35 acres alongside his 13. Her eyebrow went up. What 35 acres? Half an hour among her boxes turned up nothing. Every file in that room agreed. Teal had never owned an acre beyond the 13. The town had believed for 37 years that Ambrose Teal had nothing. The truth ran the other way. He had owned everything that mattered and had buried it in the shape of debts he never meant to collect. The town clerk spread the plat maps across the counter. The deed the county issued him in May carried boilerplate 100 years old. All appurtenant and adjoining lands held by the grantor, recorded or unrecorded. A clause that almost never meant anything, because an unrecorded deed was a document the world had quietly agreed to lose. Nobody lifted one out from under a basement floor. He had. The cure, the clerk explained, was a quiet title action, and that meant a lawyer. The last advice came free. The moment word of this got out, somebody would come out of the woodwork. Somebody always did. Harmon Wilkes kept his office above the pharmacy. One flight of stairs, 26 years of practice. He listened without interrupting, filled a yellow pad, then priced it in the flat voice of a man estimating lumber. The 35 acres, standing in timber and bordering conserved land, would appraise between $55,000 and $80,000. The cash and silver would bring $8,000 to $10,000 quickly. The bearer bonds $15,000 to $18,000 once authenticated. The savings bonds in Teal's own name were a different road. The estate road, made of waiting. "Is the money mine?" Chester asked. Wilkes turned the pad around. Vermont had no simple rule of finders keepers, but the position was as favorable as these things ever came. Chester owned the land outright. Teal had left no heir, and in 37 years no will had been probated. Abandoned personal property in the eyes of the law. Document everything. give notice wherever notice was owed, then wait out the statutory period and let the calendar finish the work. One detail kept pulling Wilkes back. The deed had sat unrecorded since 1972, for want of a $9 filing fee. $9. 54 years of limbo. In the months ahead, Wilkes proved right about every figure on that pad. What he had not guessed was that both letters would land in the same week. The first money Wilkes cleared went where money should have gone 40 years earlier. A real roof, new wiring, a porch on poured footings, square and honest. By late November, smoke climbed from a chimney cold since before most of Colby Hollow was born, and climbed every morning after. The neighboring happened almost by accident. Merle's delivery truck came up the lane with a slipping clutch, and Chester put it right for the cost of parts. When Merle reached for his wallet, Chester mentioned a tarp and a rotary hammer once sold on credit to a stranger no bank would have trusted with a stamp. They called it even. Neither man shook on it, which in Vermont is how a thing gets settled. The diner steps came next, rebuilt for Lottie against meals. An 81-year-old neighbor's cracked stove firebox welded sound for nothing. One morning, a wooden sign stood at the end of the lane in Merle's blunt lettering. Boyd, repairs, welding, small engines. Chester never asked. Merle never explained. Toby Lund arrived with the sign. 15, a dairy farm kid from across the ridge, coming by after school to help, though what he came for was the machines. He had a gift nobody at home had time to feed. Chester, who had never had a son, discovered how much of 40 years he wanted to pass into somebody else's hands. One afternoon, Toby watched him set the micrometer against a shaft he had already turned twice. You measure things you already know the answer to? Chester checked the reading before he looked up. Measuring is how you pay respect to what you're about to touch. Then the county paper ran the story. Hidden vault. Secret benefactor of the hard years. A photograph of Chester before the new porch, looking like a man who wished they had photographed the barn. If someone you loved ever set a price on you, and you rebuilt a life anyway with your own two hands, you understand Chester Boyd better than any newspaper could. Hit subscribe. These stories are told for exactly you. Stay with him. The article took 3 weeks to travel its full circle. Then, 2 letters came in the same week. One of them in a hand Chester could have recognized in the dark. The first letter came from Albany. A lawyer for one Averil Granger, self-described distant great-nephew of Ambrose Teal, demanded that all activity on the property cease, and a full accounting of everything recovered from beneath the farmhouse. Wilkes laid it flat on the desk with 2 fingers. One letter did not make an heir. Serious only if Granger could prove the relation. And proving kinship to a man who left no paper was slow work. The real cost was time. The quiet title would slide 2 to 4 months. And one dry observation. In 26 years, he had never seen this kind of letter beat the newspaper into town. The second letter ran 3 pages, in a hand he had known before he touched the envelope. Corinne was worried sick. She hated to think of him managing all of it alone at his age. Near the end, in passing, she mentioned an elder law attorney and the options when there were questions about a person's capacity. None of this is about control, Dad, she wrote. Capacity. He read the word twice. He took both letters to Wilkes, who read the second one, and everything easy left his face. The November power of attorney had never been revoked. The paper had just announced in print that Chester Boyd held assets. 3 weeks later, his daughter was asking elder law questions about capacity. Wilkes wanted the revocation drafted before the office closed, and it was. Written, signed, witnessed. Certified copies went to Corinne and to the credit union, so no institution holding $1 of his would honor a signature not his own. The judgments were public paper, and Wilkes had pulled two in an afternoon. A card company, a casino operator across the state line. One judgment dated before the November she first brought him papers to sign. So the buzzing phone he had turned face down on his own kitchen table had a name now, and so did the hurry that could not wait. He had spent the whole winter calling it heartbreak. It had kept a ledger all along. Wilkes closed the folder. One thing more, laid out plainly. The Juniper Street sale carried the markings of undue influence, a power of attorney signed on trust, a sale authorization a grieving man had been steered into, the proceeds gone. An elder abuse claim could claw back a real share of that money. Chester had a case worth bringing. Chester sat quiet long enough for the radiator to tick twice. Then he shook his head. He would not spend whatever years he had left across a courtroom from his only child. He set his cap back on. A man can decide a part isn't worth scrapping, he told Wilkes, without bolting it back into the machine. A boundary, not a war. A dead man had spent a fortune buying strangers' debts to set them free. His own daughter had sold her father to feed one that freed no one. He never answered his daughter's letter. 3 days before Christmas, a silver SUV turned onto Tamarack Ridge Road and slowed at his mailbox. Toby saw the car first. He looked at it, then at Chester's face, and read something nobody taught him to read. He set his wrenches back in their drawer without a sound. "I'd best head home, Mr. Boyd." 15 years old, and the boy knew when a man needed the yard to himself. Corinne stepped onto the gravel in a coat that had cost more than the truck parked beside it. For the first time Chester could remember, she really looked, at a house her father had built back to life. The straight porch, lamplight in windows dark for 37 years. "Dad?" She came closer. "There's so much going on out here. The article, the lawyers. At your age, I just don't want you alone." "I'm not alone. I mean family." "I know what you mean." He pulled the rag from his belt and wiped his hands, unhurried. Then he laid the facts side by side, like parts on a bench. "2 letters came in the same week," he said. "One from Albany, wanting everything in that vault. One from you, wondering whether I'm fit to manage my own affairs. Both 3 weeks after the newspaper." He folded the rag. "I read drawings for 40 years, Corinne. 2 lines can sit on opposite ends of a sheet and still belong to the same part. A man learns to see when they do. That's not... You took my house." He did not raise his voice or soften it. "You gave me 3 weeks and 2 suitcases, and you didn't call. Not once. Until a newspaper told you I'd found something worth money. I've read the judgments, Corinne. I know where my house went. The power of attorney is revoked. The bank already has the papers. There's nothing of mine left for anybody to manage. I was going to win it back." She said it the way she must have said it to herself for years. He did not argue with that arithmetic. Neither had the casino. "I'm your daughter." Her voice broke, and he believed the break. He had known that voice since before she could walk. What he no longer believed was what it meant. He looked at her a long moment. "Every metal I ever worked will carry a load up to a limit. Past that limit, it gives, and it does not come back to the shape it was, no matter who apologizes to the press that bent it. I'm not past that limit with you. But tonight, I'm close. Go home, Corinne." She glanced at the lit windows, and he answered the questions she had not asked. "There's a place at my table that has always been yours, but it's set for my daughter, not for whoever wrote me that letter." She drove out slowly. He stood in the cold, watching the taillights go down Tamarack Ridge Road until the trees took them. Not triumph, not quite peace either. What settled in him, the rag still in his hand, was the feeling a floor gives when it carries, at last, exactly the load it was designed for. Nothing straining, nothing cracking. The Granger claim did not lose so much as come apart. In February, Imogene Sharp carried her genealogy folder to the courthouse, and it showed Averill Granger's branch had split away from the Teal line 3 generations back. Nothing documented since. No relation, no standing. The Albany lawyer withdrew in a letter of 4 sentences. Spring came, and with it, the judgment. Quiet title granted, 48 acres, free and clear, in one piece. The 13 he had bought with the last of what his daughter never found, and the 35 that an unpaid $9 fee had kept off the county books for more than half a century. He did not sell the woods. Wilkes brought him timber offers worth more than everything in the vault, and Chester signed a conservation easement instead. Ambrose Teal had kept that forest standing for reasons he never told anyone, and Chester saw no cause to be the man who ended them. One careful cut, marked tree by tree, put a new roof on the barn. The barn became a true workshop that summer, and on Saturday mornings it filled with the neighbors' kids, learning why a small engine quits. And on Toby Lund's 16th birthday, an apprentice by then in everything but the paperwork, Chester put the micrometer in the boy's hand and closed his fingers over it. Finish school first. There's a second bench out there with nobody at it, and it'll keep. The envelopes tied with twine went to Imogene's archive, along with the dime store ledger, a glass case in the one-room collection, and on it a small brass plate that finally gave Ambrose Teal his name back. Every paper the courts owed him arrived in its own season. What his daughter owed him came slower, and not through any court. The card came in late spring, and it had lines in it. She thought about her mother's sewing machine more than she had expected, a little about the city, nothing about lawyers. And at the bottom, in letters smaller than the rest, "I'm sorry, Dad." He read it 3 times while his coffee went cold. He did not answer it. 40 years at a bench had taught him which things were repairs and which were time. He laid the card in the kitchen drawer, next to Rosalie's thimble, mailed north by the family that bought the Juniper Street house after he wrote to ask. The card and the thimble lay side by side in the dark, the way some things belong. She heard nothing back. In June, she came up the road herself, no letter ahead, no lawyer behind, and stood where she had stood in December, looking at him, not the house. "I didn't come about money, Dad. I came to say it to your face. I'm sorry. Can you forgive me?" It hurt worse than the folders ever had, because this was the voice from the crayon drawings, and he had grieved that girl like a death. He was quiet a long while. "I forgave you back in the winter. That was the easy half. The rest we do slow, the way anything worth keeping gets fixed. Supper's at 6. Your place is still set." She ate at his table that night. Nothing rewound, trust rebuilt a Saturday at a time. When she drove out, he left the porch light on. And each morning after, he woke to gray light over the ridge, put the coffee on, and walked out to a barn full of work he wanted. A man of 74 who had been priced, sold, and left on a curb, and who had come, by his own 2 hands and one hard act of grace, all the way home. Chester Boyd spent 40 years measuring what metal could bear before it gave way. He never guessed the hardest measurement of his life would be his own, or that a man of 74, priced and liquidated by his only child, would turn out to have a full life's load left in him. The thing worth the most on Tamarack Ridge was never under the slab. It was the man standing on it. And somewhere up that road tonight, a barn light is burning, and at one kitchen table, the place that sat empty all winter is filled again.
He forgave her. Not because the hurt was gone, or because anything she took came back, but because he had spent his whole life fixing what other people had given up on. And he would not give up on his own child. Maybe you would have done the same. Maybe you'd have kept that place empty, and no one could blame you. So the last question is yours, not his. In Chester's place, would you have forgiven her? Tell us below. If you know someone whose own family wrote them off, send them this story tonight. Let them know that being left behind is not the same as being used up. And if you want more stories about people the world counted out too soon, subscribe. That is the only kind told here.